finally we have the Cubs and the Cardinals meeting up. I'm like, when are they going to face off? I know that people didn't expect the Cardinals to be good this year, but now that they are, this is a fun week for us. How is it going so far with the Cardinals dominating in game one? And is this a good litmus test to see what the Cardinals are going to do at the trade deadline?
A super fun series here at Busch Stadium. This is a huge series and a huge test for the St. Louis squad that I think has remarkably surprised a lot of the industry, candidly, including myself, and how good they've been, how consistent they've been. The Cubs, too. I mean, they've pretty much had the division since the season started. And you guys know this. Every year we come in, we talk about the 500 NL Central. It's, who can win 81 games? They're probably going to win the division. Now we have the Cardinals, Cubs, the Brewers, and to some degree, the Reds all kind of vying for this division. And I have no idea how it's going to go. I do know this series, anytime you have the Cardinals and Cubs play each other, it's a big deal. But this one particularly because these teams are so close atop the division. And as we head into the trade deadline, just 1 week away from July, it's going to have a lot of ramifications on how each team proceeds further. So I'm excited to see how the rest of the series shakes out.
Does it really come down to this series, though, how the Cardinals determine what they're going to do the rest of this year? Is it really on this series? Because they're in a good spot. They have young guys playing. They're performing. Their pitching, I think, has been better than they expected. So do you really think it comes down to this series? Because if so, they're off to a great start because they whooped the Cubs last night.
Well, I would have said if they got swept in 4 games, that would have, I think, been a pretty solid tell. But that's not going to happen because they did win on Monday. I think when you're looking at what the Cardinals are going to do going forward, how they play heading into the All-Star break will ultimately force John Mozeliak to make the decision. But I want to caution, just like all year long, it's not black and white about the trade deadline. Just like the Cardinals overall, it hasn't been black and white versus player runway versus team results. There is a way the Cardinals can do both. And when you're looking at where this team stacks up heading into July, they're very much in contention for the division. They're very much in contention for the wild card. Do you focus on the long-term goal, which was the overall priority for this season, of player development and knowing what you have in 2026 or beyond? Or do you recognize that so many of these players, you just saw Alec Burleson, him included, have taken steps forward much earlier than the team maybe would have expected. And now you're sitting in a spot come July where all of a sudden you might be a contending team this year, even if that wasn't always the plan. So it's not just this series, it's their play through the rest of the All-Star or until the All-Star break. But they do have a lot of division matchups coming forward. They play Pittsburgh next week and then 3 more games at Wrigley Field over 4th of July. So we'll see how the team shapes up heading into the All-Star break.
Katie, I think that a lot of baseball fans out there have been surprised by the Cardinals' success this season because of the way that the last year and a half have gone. And you cover this team very closely. So what do you think the biggest difference is between this year and last year? What has accounted for most of the success in having them be right there at this point in the season?
Honestly, Trevor, I hope this comes across the way that I mean it. I think it's the lessened expectations. In 2024, the Cardinals are coming off their worst season in almost 30 years. And the 2023 season was embarrassing on all records. And in 2024, there was a lot of internal pressure to right the ship. That's why the Cardinals went out and, loaded their rotation with veteran guys like Sonny Gray, Kyle Gibson, Lance Lynn. And the young guys that they called up upon, whether that's Jordan Walker, whether that's Mason Wynn, Nolan Gorman, they faced immense pressure to perform now because the direction of the franchise rested solely on the 2024 season. And the Cardinals were much better in 2024 compared to 2023, but still missed the playoffs. And when the Cardinals decided to do their transition season this year, the expectations overall relax. And that's not to say that the organization expected them to lose and were okay with losing. It's suggested the opposite, actually. It was, hey, we're going to give these young players that we believe are going to be permanent fixtures in our club going forward the amount of time that they need and amount of playing time to become accustomed to the major leagues without having to worry about the team result. And what that allowed these players to do is focus on their game, focus on performing. They're not worried about if they're going to get sent down to AAA after a bad week. They're allowed to grow through the game and early mistakes, and that's directly led to wins. I don't think it's unfair to say that the correlation between letting the kids play, if you will, and the win column directly ties into each other. Because this Cardinals team was afforded the ability to just relax and go play baseball, they've done exactly that, and it turns out they have a lot of good ball players on their roster.
Katie, Cards fan Kane wants to know, I understand why Burleson is getting the opportunities he has, but have Gorman and or Walker gotten enough opportunities to prove themselves?
This is a super good question, and this is exactly where the organization is looking right now. All year long, we've talked about balancing runway and results, right? Well, what about extending runway to the players who have provided the results, like Burleson? You're seeing that a little bit more with Nolan Gorman, maybe not to the extent that the Cardinals wanted to, but Jordan Walker's on pace for about 400 at-bats this year. Same with Gorman, maybe a little less, around 350. 400 at-bats to me is a solid enough sample size to decide what this player is going forward. And what is going to be a really difficult decision for Oli Marmol going forward is, does he continue extending runway to players who don't have the same production or stat line as players like Ivan Herrera when he's healthy and Alec Burleson? And unfortunately for Jordan Walker's case, he fits into that. So can the Cardinals continue seeing what they have in Jordan Walker and playing him those 600 at-bats? They can, but if they continue to contend, there's going to be a lot of pressure to play the guys that are performing. And at some point, the organization is going to have to decide, can they change the runway between players? I don't think they're going to switch the direction. I still think the Cardinals should stick to what they planned for 2025 and pledge for the future, which is finding out what young players can help the team going forward. But maybe what changes is the players they're evaluating. So I'm not quite there on Jordan Walker yet. But I do think if the Cardinals keep up their winning ways, we'll see a focus to the players that are performing, regardless of who the organization pledged playing time for early in the year.
You spoke on a couple of the young guys trying to get more opportunities, but there has been one guy who's been absolutely rock solid for the last 3 years and got a little bit better every year, and that's Brendan Donovan. Let's talk, in your words, what has he meant to this team, and just kind of literally being the cornerstone, the consistent guy putting the bat on the ball every day in and day out? What has he meant for keeping kind of everyone on that in that lineup kind of even keel and the production continuing?
I love a good Brendan Donovan segment because he deserves all of the praise. When the Cardinals were at their peak, think early 2010s, they had a bunch of gritty guys who played around the infield, played the game the right way, did the small things. For lack of a better term, they played to the Cardinal way. And Brendan Donovan reminds me a lot of those guys. And he has been invaluable to the team year after year. But this year, you can make the argument that he's been their most valuable player. His defense at second base, though he can play around the diamond, as we know, he's a utility Gold Glove winner. But what he's been able to do at second base has really solidified the infield, what he's been able to do with the lineup, whether he's batting in the 3-hole or batting leadoff. He gets on base, he hits the ball. And there's been some tremendous growth from Donovan from a personal standpoint. Entering the year, he's 28, and he was kind of in the middle, not old enough to be an established veteran, not young enough to be considered in that runway playing time development group. So we kind of came into the season without an identity and decided, I'm not someone that's going to talk about myself or boast myself up. I'm not one of those loud leaders, but I'm going to find a way to be a really good teammate and really take this club under my wings and try to be a leader in my own way. And he's done exactly that. So we'll focus on the stats and the production because that's what wins ball games. But Brendan Donovan, as a leader, he's also grown tremendously, has the respect of the veterans across the board because he goes out and plays every day. And as you're looking for this Cardinals team in 2025 and beyond, and you look at the future of who could lead this core, I think Brendan Donovan has solidified himself as a key member of this club going forward.
Well, if you're a normal human, you can't speak English to your pup. But what you can do to understand what they love, which is Spot and Tango Unkibble, is to see how they react when you put the Unkibble in the bowl. And my pup, Penelope, loves it. So does Bella.
Well, Bella speaks Spanish, so she says, muy bien. I love this stuff.
She says, wow, Dad, thanks for creating a custom plan based on my age, weight, breed, and activity level. You nailed it. And also, it's made with 100% whole fresh ingredients like real USDA meats, fruits, and veggies, but it's 40% less expensive than frozen food. So upgrade your pet's bowl with Spot and Tango Unkibble. And for a limited time, go to spotandtango.com/foul and use code FOUL for 50% off your first order. That's spotandtango.com/foul, code FOUL to get 50% off your first order.
You recently wrote an article previewing the Chicago Cubs series, and you talked about the Cardinals' rotation and being much more of a strength than they were projected to be. They're sixth in the league in innings. They have about a league average right in the middle ERA, which you'll take with everything that we were anticipating. But one thing interesting you mentioned was the organization's been extremely intentional about maximizing rest and keeping guys on a 6-day rotation. So, in your opinion, or maybe things that you've heard, where does that 6 rotation thing come from? Is that like a concerted effort to get guys a little bit more rest so that you can let them go deeper into games and we can have the starters eating innings? Is that because the bullpen was projected to be maybe a little weaker or inexperienced and you want more out of your starters? What's the thinking behind the 6-day rotation thing?
It's actually, it comes from a lack of depth in the organization overall. Outside of Michael McGreevy, who will take a spot start for the Cardinals tonight, you can make the argument that McGreevy should be in the rotation full time, and I wouldn't push it, but this goes back to our original point. The Cardinals do not have really any depth in AAA outside of Michael McGreevy. Their top pitching prospects, while talented and exciting, aren't yet built up to the major league level, and they just have a gap in terms of health. Trevor, you can speak to the importance of this. Pitching health is top notch, and unfortunately, we've seen a rise in pitching injuries. The Cardinals are one of the very few teams, knock on wood, that have not had a significant injury to a pitcher in the rotation or in the bullpen. And that is because Oli Marmol and pitching coach Dusty Blake have been so intentional about keeping guys on a 6-day schedule. That extra day of rest, as you know, matters so much. And when you have a staff that's mostly veteran, Miles Michaelis, Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, those things matter. Then you have your younger 2 guys, and Andre Palante and Matthew Liberatore, who are becoming starters for the first time in their careers on a consistent basis. You also want to manage the innings a little bit. So giving these guys and maximizing the off days, utilizing McGreevy when he can. Steven Matz took a couple of spot starts when needed. That's allowed the rotation to stay on the schedule. And it's 1, to benefit the pitchers, but it's 2, to cover the lack of depth in the organization, because if you are down 2 starters in this rotation, we are no longer talking about how surprisingly good this rotation has been. We're facing a much bigger crisis in the overall state of pitching in the organization.
Oli Marmol, is he the manager of the year, and how has he done this? Because people were saying Chaim Bloom might be thinking about going a different direction, but he's done such a good job, you can't get rid of him.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think it's natural to be to call into question a new front office coming in if a manager will change as well. Also, when you look at the last 2 years for the Cardinals, just did not perform well. But I think Oli Marmol has done an incredible job managing so many different things that most managers don't have to think about, because not only is he managing to win as many games as possible, he's also managing for the long-term longevity of the organization. And to your point, AJ, there was no guarantee he'd be here after 2025. Now, I think that is quickly changing, but nothing's for certain. He's done an exceptional job. He has the Cardinals 7 games over 500. They were projected to be one of the worst teams in baseball. And while I never thought they were going to be as low as 25 out of 30, like I saw in many projections, I certainly didn't see them as playoff contenders come the last week of June. And he's been able to do that by managing playing time, promising playing time to players that the front office highlighted, while also keeping tempers and egos in check in that clubhouse. As you all know, it can be very difficult when you have players that you have to sit because other players were promised playing time ahead of them. He's managed all of that extremely well. He's kept his pitching staff healthy. He's kept a lot of these young players on track, if not ahead of schedule for the future. And based on just where the club was a year ago to where they are now, everyone seems to be on board with this transition season. That could have easily gone sideways, especially in April, where they really just didn't have a good month. But he has just done some tremendous work. And I hope we continue to talk about this narrative, because in my opinion, what he's doing in St. Louis is not talked about nearly enough.
All right, before we go, Katie, I have to ask you this. We kind of mentioned in the last question, Chaim and Mozeliak. This is Mo's last year before he steps down and goes into a different role in his life. Is he going to go for it? Is he going to go for it at the trade deadline? This is the end of his legacy. And nobody wants to go out on a low note. Do you think that DeWitt's and the owners of the Cardinals will say, Mo, here's some extra money. It's your last year. Boom, let's throw it all in and see what we can do?
That is such a fascinating question, because I can see both sides of this. And you are right that this is ultimately going to be an ownership decision, an ownership that has prepared for a recession in terms of both gate revenue, ticket sales, and then the restructured television deal. So the Cardinals were expecting to lose some money this year based on years prior. But when you're thinking about Mo's final year, the fact that the Cardinals have already laid out their transition plan heading into 2026, It's a great question on what the Cardinals should do. I'm under the belief that they can continue doing both, that they can continue building towards the future, but still upgrading their roster. The Cardinals are not going to go up and do this full big blockbuster trade to improve the roster and go all in right now. That's just not something that they've done really in years where they had no excuse to. And now that they do have a legitimate excuse to keep the organization on track for 26, I can't see Mo deviating from that plan. He also has to keep in mind that whatever decisions he makes in July will have, he has nothing to say with it after October. That's when Chaim Bloom is taking over. So the whole point of creating this transition plan was to implement a clean segue, a clean slate for Chaim Bloom to take over next season. That's not to suggest that the Cardinals can't be competitive and can't continue pushing to be contenders. But when you're looking at what they're going to do at the trade deadline, well, they still haven't fully decided and likely won't for a couple more weeks. There is a way for them to do both. And I think that's the best look for the organization overall. They don't need to blow it up and sell. They don't need to blow it up and buy. They can incrementally improve at the deadline and still keep their transition plan in place for Chaim to take over to ensure that successful, passing of the power.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.